Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step into a year when muskets crack in the distance, ships groan at their moorings, and the word liberty hangs in the air like wood smoke that never quite clears. You can almost feel it, can't you? That strange pull between promise and fear, between grand speeches and the hard dirt beneath your feet. What happens when a nation talks about freedom, while thousands of black Americans wake each morning not knowing whether the day will bring wages, hunger, flight, sail, or the sharp command of another person's will? That is the uneasy place you enter tonight, where war stirs old rules loose, but does not kindly replace them. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe and tell me where you are listening from, plus your local time, because it is always a little magical to imagine this quiet hour stretching across the world. Now, dim the lights, and you find yourself in 1780, in a land that speaks of human equality with one breath and buys and sells human lives with the next. The morning arrives slowly. Cold light leaks through shutters, or through gaps in rough boards, or across a city alley where damp straw and ashes cling to the stones. You wake to sounds before anything else. Hooves on packed earth, pans knocking together, a baby fussing, someone coughing deep in the chest, somewhere farther off. A hammer rings against metal with that stubborn rhythm that means the day has started whether anyone welcomes it or not. You're black in America in 1780, and that simple fact means the shape of your day is never only your own. It may depend on whether you are enslaved or free, whether you live in Boston or Charleston, whether you're hired out in a town, tied to a plantation, attached to an army camp, or moving carefully between categories that look firm on paper and slippery in real life. Even freedom, if you have it, is usually a narrow, watchful thing. It can be documented, doubted, ignored, or stolen. The country around you is not yet fully a country. It is a collection of states, loyalties, fears, militias, and declarations. Men in powdered wigs write about natural rights while ledgers continue to record black names next to values in pounds. It is one of history's less charming contradictions. The language sounds noble. The practice sounds like chains, auction calls, and the scratching of quills. Still, the year feels unsettled in a way that matters. War changes ordinary habits. Armies pass through and consume food. Horses vanish. Fences come down for firewood. Roads fill with rumour. Newspapers carry arguments that drift far beyond the parlours where they are first discussed. A phrase spoken in Philadelphia may reach a dock worker in New York, or an enslaved field hand in Virginia as a whisper several weeks later. Altered but still electric. People talk. They always do. In tense times, they talk even more. You notice that black Americans in 1780 live inside many different worlds at once. In some northern places, slavery still exists, though people are beginning to challenge it with greater boldness. In the Chesapeake and the lower South, plantation slavery remains harsh and deeply rooted, tied to tobacco, rice, indigo, and the wealth of white families who call bondage ordinary. In port cities, black sailors, cooks, laundresses, labourers, craftsmen, and servants move through busy streets where ideas travel almost as fast as goods. In the countryside, distance itself can become a kind of prison. A road may lead somewhere, but not safely for you. The smell of the era is strong and layered. Salt and tar in harbour towns, animal sweat, wet wool, pine smoke, tallow candles, bread crust if the household has flour to spare, rotting cabbage in a gutter, molasses at a warehouse, mud almost everywhere. Nothing is politely sealed away. Life has an odour, history has an odour, and revolution. It turns out, smells a great deal like damp leather and unwashed uniforms. You learn quickly that people measure black life according to the needs of the moment. If labour is scarce, your skill is praised. If fear is high, your presence is treated as suspicious. A man may be trusted to drive a wagon, shoe a horse, ferry goods, or tend livestock, but not trusted to move freely after dark. A woman may be relied upon to cook, nurse children, wash linen, brew remedies, and keep an entire household functioning, while still being denied authority over her own body and time. Dependence and domination sit side by side. It is ugly. It is common. It is called normal. In 1780, many white Americans speak as if the war is a contest over principle. For black Americans, principle matters. But so does the much plainer question of who can actually protect you, free you, hire you, sell you, or chase you down. Grand ideals are real enough to stir the heart. They are simply not enough to guarantee breakfast. You live in the gap between what is proclaimed and what is enforced. The legal landscape shifts from colony to colony, state to state, town to town. Some places allow free black people to own property, marry legally, worship in recognized congregations, or sign contracts, though never on equal footing with whites. Other places narrow every path. Curfews, travel passes, patrols, and registration requirements hang over ordinary movement. A free black person may carry papers folded carefully inside a pocket or sewn into clothing, knowing that the document itself can mean the difference between passing through a checkpoint and being seized. Paper becomes a shield, a flimsy shield, but still, historians still argue whether the revolutionary language of liberty genuinely transformed white opinion in 1780, or whether most changes came from wartime disruption rather than moral awakening. Both possibilities can feel true at once. Some white people did begin to question slavery more openly. Others simply reacted to military necessity, labour shortages, or fear that the British would gain support by offering freedom. Conscience may have stirred. Self-interest definitely did. That uncertainty hangs in the air. You hear it in the careful tone of a mistress wondering whether slavery fits the new Republican spirit, right before sending someone to fetch more water. You hear it in church sermons about spiritual equality delivered to congregations seated by rank and colour. You hear it in tavern talk where men denounce tyranny over ale, then go home to households built on forced labour. Human beings are very talented at missing the point when the point threatens comfort, yet there are real cracks in the old certainty. A few enslaved people petition for freedom. Some free black communities carve out modest spaces of mutual support. Black men serve in military roles in some places, especially in the North, where manpower needs and local conditions sometimes open doors that had long been closed. Service can bring pay, clothing, movement, and occasionally a stronger claim to liberty. Occasionally. History rarely hands out blessings without receipts. You might meet a black soldier in a continental uniform, boots worn thin, musket cleaned as carefully as possible, carrying both pride and caution. You might also meet a black man who escaped to British lines because the king's officers, or at least some of them, promised freedom to those who fled rebel masters. That choice does not make the world simpler. It only changes the risks. Disease, displacement, hunger, broken promises, and military defeat follow armies of every flag. For women, the calculations are just as sharp, though less likely to be celebrated in official memory. A black woman in 1780 may carry news between households without seeming to. She may understand the tempers of white family members better than they understand themselves. She may hide scraps of food, preserve kinship ties, soothe the sick, bargain at market stall, or quietly advise someone considering escape. Her labour is often treated as background, but it holds entire worlds together. The revolution likes to picture itself in uniforms and declarations. Meanwhile, somebody still has to stir the pot, bend the shirt, and decide how to keep a child alive through winter. There are also small, strange details that survive from the era, the kinds of things that make the past feel less like a textbook and more like a room you can enter. In some cities, enslaved and free black people sold goods in markets, carrying baskets of fruit. oysters, herbs, or cakes through the streets. Some were known for particular cries, the musical calls used to attract buyers, sounds so familiar that residents could identify the seller before seeing the face. A city can remember a voice even while refusing to honour the life behind it. That is a painfully human habit. At night, the atmosphere changes, lantern light trembles, the roads become uncertain ribbons, the damp seeps through shoes, insects hum near marshes, dogs bark at movement invisible to you. For many Black Americans, night offers both danger and possibility. Patrols may be watching, so may allies. A visit to a spouse on another property, a quiet prayer meeting, a whispered exchange of news, a plan to run, or just a stolen hour of rest can belong to the dark. Daytime is supervised. Nighttime breathes differently. You also sense how much memory matters. Some Black Americans in 1780 were born in Africa and carried languages, spiritual practices, agricultural knowledge, and personal histories that white society barely noticed, though it profited from them constantly. Rice cultivation in the Low Country, for instance, drew on expertise linked to West African traditions, though planters like to congratulate themselves instead. Naturally, credit travels upward with impressive speed. Others were American-born, growing up in a world where slavery had already shaped family life for generations. They knew local roads, regional accents, white habits, church routines, planting seasons, market days, and legal dangers. This knowledge could become a tool, knowing when a road is empty, which ferryman asks questions, which household leaves the smokehouse unlatched, which minister dislikes slavery in private, which clerk can be bribed with tobacco. These are not minor details, they are survival. You begin to understand that 1780 is not a clean turning point. It is a suspended moment. A nation in rebellion claims to be inventing a freer future. While Black Americans test whether any of that future includes them, some opportunities appear, some vanish. One county may loosen, another may tighten. One owner may promise manumission, another may sell people south. One officer may enlist black men, another may refuse them outright. Nothing is smooth. Nothing is guaranteed. Even the word freedom means different things depending on where you stand. For an enslaved woman, it may mean control over her children's fate. For a hired labourer, it may mean keeping wages rather than watching them handed to a master. For a soldier, it may mean discharge papers that cannot easily be denied. For a free black sailor, it may mean stepping onto a dock without being grabbed and questioned. For an elder who has seen decades of bondage, it may mean simply ending life unowned. Large ideas become painfully specific when real people have to live inside them. And yet, despite everything, daily life does not stop to admire history's drama. Bread still needs baking, fires need tending, shirts need scrubbing, barrels need loading, fields need hoeing, children need carrying, illness needs enduring. You may hear cannon in the distance and still have to fetch water. That is one of the quiet truths of the era. Epoch-making events arrive, and ordinary labour keeps going anyway. So you stand in 1780 with the ground shifting underfoot. The war has loosened old assumptions without replacing them with safety. White Americans argue over rights, while Black Americans measure the world by harder evidence. Who holds the key? Who reads the pass? Who hears the plea? Who believes the document? Who turns away? Who opens a gate? There is danger in every direction, but there is also motion. Possibility has entered the room, though it has not sat down politely. You feel the chill of dawn leave the air. Smoke rises straighter now. Wheels creak along the road. Somewhere, a church bell marks the hour. Somewhere else, a whip cracks, and the sound carries farther than anyone would like to admit. The nation is half born, half imagined, and full of contradictions sharp enough to cut the hand that touches them. For Black Americans, 1780 is neither a simple age of oppression nor a sudden dawn of liberty. It is a tense crossing, a life lived between war and uncertain freedom, where every rumour matters, every paper matters, every choice matters, and every morning begins with the same difficult question: what kind of world are you waking into today? By midday, the land itself begins to teach you how unequal this world is, not through speeches, through distance, through mud, through the width of a road and the closeness of a doorway. In 1780, where you live changes nearly everything about how you eat, work, move, hide, and breathe. A mile inside a city can feel like a different universe from a mile in the countryside. One place crowds you with eyes, the other swallows you with silence. You step first into a northern port town, where the streets are busy long before the sun fully warms the roofs. The air carries salt, fish scales, chimney soot, horse dung, and the sharp sweetness of molasses leaking from a cask. Dock workers shout to each other over the slap of water against pilings. Rope scrapes wood. Gulls wheel and complain above barrels of flour, rum, and dried goods. Everything seems in motion, including you. In places like Boston, Newport, New York, and Philadelphia, Black Americans move through tight spaces packed with commerce. Some are enslaved domestic servants sent on errands through public streets. Some are sailors who know tides, knots, and foreign harbours better than many merchants. Some are laundresses, market women, cooks, cart drivers, apprentices, dock hands, or craftsmen. Some are free, though freedom in a city still comes with constant inspection. In town, your face can become familiar, which sometimes helps. It can also make you easier to track. Urban life offers a peculiar kind of half-visibility. You're seen all the time, yet rarely fully recognised as a person with an interior life. White households depend on black labour everywhere. Fires are lit by it. Meals are built on it. Streets are cleaned by it. Ships are loaded through it. Children are watched by it. Clothes are pressed, repaired, and carried by it. Still, the same city that relies on your hands may treat your presence as suspicious after dark. That is one of those charming little habits cities develop when they want the labour but not the liberty. In a port town, information travels almost as quickly as cargo. Sailors bring gossip from other colonies. Newspapers are read aloud in taverns. Military officers pass through inns. Merchants speak too freely when they think only other white men are listening. This means Black Americans in cities often have wider access to rumour, news, and possibility than those in isolated rural districts. A cook serving dinner may hear names, dates, and troop movements. A cart driver may notice which roads are suddenly crowded with wagons. A servant at a doorway may catch a fragment of debate about emancipation, enlistment, or danger on the waterfront. That flow of knowledge matters. It can shape escape plans, work arrangements, family visits, and military choices. It can also sharpen anxiety. A city full of talk is still a city full of watchmen, passes, patrols, and legal traps. A free black person may have to explain where he is going, who knows him, and why he's carrying certain goods. An enslaved person sent across town may carry a written note from a master as if it were a borrowed heartbeat. Lose the paper, and the street changes its face immediately. Then you leave the port behind and travel inland. The road narrows, houses grow farther apart. The smell shifts from brine and tar to pine sap, damp soil, manure, and wood smoke. Wheels sink into ruts. Frogs pulse in low marshy places. Insect song thickens near sunset. Here the countryside seems open, but the openness can mislead you. Open land is not the same as freedom. Sometimes it simply means there are fewer witnesses. On farms and plantations, geography becomes discipline. The main house sits where it can oversee yards, kitchens, smokehouses, stables, and paths. Fields stretch outward in ordered rows that look peaceful from a distance and exhausting from within. Quarters may sit close enough for surveillance or far enough to keep labourers separated from town life. Swamps, rivers, woods, and creeks shape a movement. They can hide you. They can also trap you, especially if you do not know the land well enough to trust it. In the Chesapeake, tobacco country folds itself into broad estates and worn fields. In South Carolina and Georgia, rice plantations occupy watery landscapes of tidal rivers and lowland heat, where mosquitoes rise in whining clouds and boots sink into wet earth. The labour here is severe and highly skilled. Rice cultivation requires knowledge of embankments, floodgates, soil, planting cycles, and timing. Enslaved Africans and their descendants bring much of this expertise. Though white planters prefer to describe themselves as geniuses of management, it is a familiar performance, very polished, completely unconvincing. Rural isolation creates a different tempo of life. News arrives more slowly. So do legal protections, such as they are. A free black family in a remote district may enjoy a bit more daily privacy than in a crowded city. Yet they can also become terribly vulnerable if a white neighbour disputes their status or covets their property. There may be no nearby witness willing to defend them. A document can prove freedom in theory. In practice, theory does not always outrun a horseman with authority, or at least with enough confidence to imitate it. For enslaved people in the countryside, movement is often tightly controlled, but not always in the same way. Some plantations use task systems, especially in rice regions, where a person is assigned certain work to complete and may then gain limited time afterward. Other places rely on gang labour, where groups work under direct supervision from dawn until dusk. The difference matters. In a task system, there can be narrow pockets of autonomy once work is done. Though those pockets are never secure, a person may tend a small garden, fish, repair clothing, or visit family nearby if permitted. In gang labour, the day feels more relentlessly watched, each motion pulled into the master's schedule. Touch becomes part of the geography too. Brick city walls hold the day's warmth long after sunset. A plantation field cuts your ankles with stubble. Damp linen sticks to skin in summer. Frozen pails bite at your fingers in winter. Coarse homespun scratches the neck. Mud claims the hem of a dress or the edge of a shoe. Place is not only what you see, it is what presses back against your body all day long. Churches and meeting places differ by region as well. In towns, black worshippers may gather in mixed congregations, in galleries, side pews, or outside formal notice, listening to sermons that promise heavenly equality, while earthly seating arrangements make another argument entirely. In rural districts, religious life may be more scattered, shaped by brush arbours, whispered prayer meetings, plantation preaching, or small groups gathering when work and surveillance allow. The sound of worship changes with the setting. A city chapel offers echoes of plaster and wood. A hidden outdoor gathering holds breath beneath leaves, with crickets filling the pauses between low voices. Historians still debate how much regional variation Black Americans themselves saw as meaningful in 1780, because daily survival often mattered more than broad political maps. Yet local differences plainly shaped real life. In some northern places, an enslaved person might live close enough to free black neighbours to glimpse another mode of existence. In parts of the lower South, the sheer scale of plantation slavery created black majorities in certain districts, allowing stronger retention of shared customs, language patterns, and mutual support networks. Neither setting was simple. Each carried distinct burdens and chances. You begin to notice that city and countryside also produce different kinds of danger at night. In town, the threat comes from curfews, constables, drunken soldiers, suspicious householders, and the fact that everyone knows who belongs on which street. Darkness narrows respectable movement. A lantern in the wrong hand can invite a dozen questions. In rural areas, the dark is wider and less predictable. Paths vanish into woods. Marshes breathe fog. Patrol riders listen for footsteps. Dogs pick up scents. Yet the same darkness can make secret travel possible in ways a city rarely allows. Some Black Americans use geography like a form of memory. They know which alley opens behind a cooper's yard, which wharf has loose boards under stacked rope, which tavern kitchen wastes broth worth saving, which creek can be crossed at low water, which patch of woods hides footprints after rain, which ferry operator drinks too much to ask careful questions. These details can never be written in official records with much dignity, but they are a map of lived intelligence. Empires enjoy drafting grand atlases. Survival prefers narrower lines. Children absorb place early. A black child in a city may learn to dodge carts, carry messages, identify uniforms, and stay close to familiar doorways. A child on a plantation may learn bird calls, ditch edges, planting rhythms, and the dangerous boundaries of neighbouring land. Games, chores, warnings, and lullabies all carry regional texture. Even fear has accents. Food reflects geography too. In port towns, the diet may include fish, oysters, coarse bread, scraps from elite kitchens, beans, onions, and whatever can be bought or bartered in market spaces. In the countryside, cornmeal, greens, salt pork if available, sweet potatoes, rice in the south, and garden produce shape the table. Enslaved people often stretch small rations with hunting, fishing, trapping, or cultivation in tiny plots, depending on local conditions and permissions. The taste of survival differs from one region to another, though hunger remains tediously consistent. There are quirky details that make these landscapes feel alive. In some cities, black water carriers and street vendors became so woven into local routine that residents timed parts of the day around their appearances. In the Low Country, travellers sometimes remarked on the eerie beauty of rice fields at dusk, the water catching pink light while labourers moved through it waist deep, as if the land itself were pretending not to notice the hardship it demanded. Nature is often breathtaking at the exact moment human arrangements are most cruel. It has appalling timing. Even clothing speaks to place. A dockworker's garments may be stiff with salt and tar. A domestic servant in town may wear livery chosen to reflect the wealth of a household. A field labourer's clothes show the red soil, grass stains, sweat marks, and mended tears of repeated use. Shoes, or the lack of them, tell their own story. Urban cobbles punish bare feet differently than sandy paths or flooded dikes. A person learns the ground through soles long before learning it from maps. Free black communities, where they exist, also reflect geography. In cities, there may be clusters of households close enough for mutual help, shared worship, or small economic exchange. In rural regions, kin and community might stretch across scattered cabins, neighbouring plantations, ferry crossings, and seasonal gatherings. Proximity changes the form of solidarity, but not the need for it. No matter the setting, endurance is rarely a solo art, and so the landscape of 1780 becomes more than scenery. It is a structure of power, a set of roots, a pattern of sounds, and a pressure on the body. The harbour gives access to ships and rumours, but also to capture. The city gives anonymity and a crowd, but also relentless scrutiny. The plantation gives space enough to disappear for an hour, perhaps, but also the long reach of ownership over every path. The farm gives quiet, but quiet can mean no help is coming. You end the day understanding that black life in 1780 is not lived on a single stage. It unfolds on wharves slick with salt, in alleys heavy with smoke, along roads lined with cedar and pine, across fields shimmering with heat, beside kitchens, docks, marshes, workshops, gardens, and riverbanks. Each place shapes the possibilities of speech, labour, worship, kinship, and resistance. Geography decides who hears the rumour first, who sees the patrol coming, who reaches market, who can hide, who can run, and who is forced to stay very still. The map is never neutral. It leans on every life that crosses it. The day begins before the sky has properly decided to lighten. You wake to the scrape of a shovel, the creak of floorboards, the thud of a bucket set down too hard. In some places a bell rings. In others a voice calls out. Somewhere a rooster tries to sound important. Somewhere else a child whimpers and is hushed. Work is already waiting. It always is. In 1780, black labour is not one thing. It is many things, spread across kitchens, fields, wharves, washyards, stables, workshops, taverns, smokehouses, ships, gardens, and road crews. It bends with the season, the region, the weather, and the needs of whoever claims the right to command it. That variety can sound almost interesting from a distance. Up close, it means your body must be ready for anything and rested for almost nothing. On a plantation morning, the air may be cold enough to sting your hands or thick enough to cling to your skin. You step outside and smell damp earth, ashes from last night's fire, livestock, standing water, or crushed weeds underfoot. Tools wait where they were left: hoes, rakes, axes, baskets, barrels. There is no dramatic music, sadly. Only the small sounds of people bracing themselves for another day of being useful to someone else. Field labour depends on the crop. In tobacco country, the work demands planting, weeding, worming, cutting, hanging, stripping, and packing. Tobacco is fussy and exhausting, like a wealthy uncle who complains through dinner and still expects to be admired. In rice districts, labour can mean standing in water, shaping banks, controlling flooding, transplanting seedlings, and harvesting under punishing conditions. In indigo regions, the processing has its own heavy rhythm. On mixed farms, you may move between corn, livestock, fences, woodcutting, hauling, and repair. No matter the crop, there is repetition: swing, lift, bend, carry, return, swing, lift, bend, carry, return. The body learns these patterns until motion becomes nearly automatic. Your palms toughen, your back tightens, your shoulders carry an ache that never quite leaves. Sweat stings your eyes. Dirt settles into seams of clothing and into the fine cracks of skin. A person can become extraordinarily skilled at labour that the world chooses not to call expertise. That is one of slavery's ugliest tricks. It takes mastery and renames it mere service. Many enslaved people possess abilities that households and businesses rely on completely. A blacksmith shapes tools, hinges, nails, and wagon parts with practiced precision. A carpenter frames walls, repairs roofs, builds storage chests, and fits boards so neatly that weather stays outside. A cooper makes barrels essential for storing flour, fish, rum, and countless other goods. A boatman reads current and tide. A cook manages heat, timing, preservation, and the strange moods of white appetites. A seamstress cuts and mends with speed that keeps a household decent in public. None of this happens by accident. Skill has to be learned, remembered, and refined. In towns, hired labour creates a different tempo. An enslaved man might be sent to load cargo, clean stable, push cart, or carry messages. An enslaved woman might bake, wash, iron, scrub floors, care for children, sell produce, or help in a shop. Some enslavers hire out workers and collect the wages themselves, which is one of those arrangements that reveals exactly how creative people can become when trying to profit from another person's effort. In some cases, the worker keeps a small share. In many cases, the worker sees very little of what the labour brings in. Either way, the strain belongs to the labourer. Domestic work is often described too gently in old records, as if keeping a household is mostly a matter of dusting a chair and looking composed near a teapot. In truth, it is constant and physical. Water must be hauled, fires must be coaxed alive before sunrise, Grain must be ground. Pots must be scrubbed with sand or lye. Linen must be boiled, beaten, wrung, dried, and ironed. Children must be dressed, fed, monitored, and soothed. Chamber pots must be emptied. Floors must be swept. Candles must be trimmed. Meals must appear at the right moment as though by magic. Because comfort likes to pretend it creates itself. The kitchen has its own climate. Heat from the hearth presses against your face. Grease thickens the air. Steam curls upward from boiling pots. Bread crust browns. Onions soften. Meat spits. And ashes settle on everything. The smell can be rich and maddening all at once, especially when you're cooking food you may not be allowed to eat in satisfying amounts. That particular cruelty does not need extra decoration. It is already complete. Women's labour is especially likely to be treated as invisible, though it fills every hour. A black woman may rise first, sleep last, and pass through a dozen kinds of work before noon. She may cook, wash, spin, patch, carry infants, soothe the sick, clean wounds, milk cows, weed gardens, and still be expected to smile politely in the presence of people who think they are showing kindness by not shouting that day. She must often read moods as carefully as tasks. The weather matters, so does the temper of the house. Men's labour, meanwhile, is often remembered through the more public tasks of ploughing, hauling, carpentry, smithing, or military work. But that should not fool you into imagining clarity or rank. The boundaries shift. A man may split wood at dawn, mend a fence before noon, help load flour in the afternoon, and sleep in a loft near horses because another task begins before sunrise. Labour follows need, not dignity. Children work, too. Some begin with small tasks, carrying kindling, minding poultry, fetching water, scaring birds from crops, or watching younger children. Others enter heavier routines early, especially if they are strong enough to be judged useful. Childhood exists, but it is thinned by expectation. A child still notices dragonflies, puddles, warm bread, and the soft nose of a mule. A child also learned quickly that being small does not keep work from finding you. Historians continue to disagree about how much autonomy skilled enslaved workers could sometimes leverage in 1780. Some evidence suggests artisans, drivers, and hired workers negotiated better clothing, extra food, or modest freedom of movement in certain settings. Other evidence shows how fragile those advantages were, disappearing with a sale, a new owner, a debt, or a burst of suspicion. A narrow privilege could feel substantial in daily life and still vanish overnight. That uncertainty sits inside every favour. There is also the matter of pace. Work is measured differently depending on the setting. In gang labour, the pace is collective and enforced. In task labour, the pace may be individually calculated, though never freely chosen. In town service, it is often tied to clocks, customers, or household routines. On the docks, ships compress time brutally. Cargo must move when tide, weather, and departure demand it. Barrels thump, crates scrape, rope burns the palms, salt wind roughens the lips. The harbour is loud, but not patient. A quirky detail from the period survives in descriptions of skilled urban workers who became known by reputation even among white residents. A black cook might be quietly sought out for exceptional pastries. A boatman might be trusted because he knew a dangerous channel better than anyone else. An enslaved carpenter might be requested for difficult joinery. Reputation could spread without ever becoming full respect. People love competence when it serves them. Equality is where they suddenly become thoughtful and unavailable. Work also includes what happens in the margins. After assigned labour, some enslaved people tend tiny garden plots, fish at dusk, mend their own clothing, or carve out side economies through basket making, poultry raising, or market sales if permitted. These activities are not leisure in the modern sense. They are extensions of survival. A patch of greens, a few eggs, an extra shirt repair, a fish caught in muddy water. These can mark the difference between hunger and endurance. You notice the sounds of work accumulating through the day. Hose striking soil, laundry paddles beating cloth, iron hissing near damp linen, a whetstone turning against a blade, oxen snorting, harness buckles clinking, a child being called sharply back to task. The ring of hammer on anvil travels far, cleaner than human voices. Even silence can be a work sound, especially in hot weather, when everyone saves breath and the labour continues in a dull, relentless hush. Touch records the day as much as memory does. Splinters in the thumb, soap cracking the knuckles, rope grooves pressed into the shoulder, fine grit between the toes, a scorch on the wrist from a careless pot handle, the weight of wet cloth across both arms, the sticky drag of humidity against the neck, a bruise from lifting what should have taken 2 people. The body becomes a ledger that does not need ink. There is a strange social theatre wrapped around labour as well. White people often demand cheerfulness along with effort, as though a well-run household or profitable farm requires not only obedience, but a pleasing atmosphere. You must be efficient but not proud, visible but not too noticeable, intelligent but never threatening, exhausted but still responsive when called. It is a performance with impossible rules. The reviews are terrible. The audience insists on more. Free black labourers face different hardships, but not easy ones. A free man in a northern town may hire out by the day, compete for work with white labourers, carry proof of status, and still risk being underpaid or harassed. A free black woman taking in washing, sewing, or market trade may work with remarkable independence while remaining one illness away from disaster. Freedom allows more claim over the fruits of labour, but the larger economy is still tilted hard against you. Wages are uncertain. Credit is scarce. Protection is thinner than it should be. Some black Americans connected to armies perform still another kind of work. They drive wagons, cook for troops, dig earthworks, wash uniforms, tend horses, carry supplies, and in some cases fight. Military labour carries movement, danger, and occasional pay. It also carries disease, hunger, cold camps, and the chaos of command. A uniform does not erase race. It merely adds another layer of expectation on top of it. By late afternoon, fatigue changes the atmosphere. The light softens, smoke from cooking fires thickens. Tools feel heavier though they weigh the same. Conversation, if it comes, is brief and practical. Who has seen the missing bucket? Whether the flour is low, if the child's fever has eased, if rain is coming, the smell of supper, however thin, can steady the spirit for a moment. So can the sight of another person sitting down at last, shoulders dropping as though released from a hook, and yet work is not only extraction. Within it, people hide knowledge, preserve dignity, and sometimes create small zones of control. A seamstress may stitch an extra scrap into a garment for later use. A cook may flavour a pot in a way that carries memory. A cooper may teach a younger worker by gesture when words are risky. A field hand may set a sustainable pace despite pressure to rush. A laundress may pass news over a rinse tub while hands stay busy. Labour becomes, in quiet moments, a place where human beings refuse to become mere tools. You end the day understanding that black work in 1780 builds much of the country while bringing little safety to those who perform it. It feeds households, funds trade, supports armies, clears roads, repairs buildings, grows export crops, tends children, and keeps whole communities alive. It is skilled, punishing, necessary, and constantly undervalued. Dawn calls it forth. Darkness barely dismisses it. From the first bucket lifted to the last ember checked, labour shapes the day so completely that even rest feels like a borrowed thing, briefly held, never fully owned. By evening, rumour becomes its own weather. It moves through tavern doors, across ferry decks, into kitchens, beside campfires, and along the edges of fields. You cannot see it directly. yet you feel it everywhere. A whispered promise can warm a room faster than fire. A frightening report can chill the skin even in summer. In 1780, black Americans live inside a storm of news that is rarely complete, often distorted, and still too important to ignore. You hear things in fragments first. The British are offering freedom. The British are lying. The rebels need soldiers. The rebels do not want black soldiers. A master in one county has freed a man for service. A woman in another place has run to the lines and vanished. A proclamation was read somewhere near the coast. Someone saw men in uniform speaking to enslaved people by the road. Someone else swears that disease is killing runaways in camp. Every voice carries urgency. None carries certainty. That uncertainty matters because information is never merely interesting. It is practical. It can change whether you stay put, whether you trust a promise, whether you visit a spouse across town, whether you hide food, whether you keep a packed bundle ready, whether you dare to believe that the world is cracked open even a little. For people whose lives are controlled by others, news becomes more than knowledge. It becomes a tool, a temptation, and sometimes a trap. In white households, political conversation spills out constantly. Men argue over parliament, taxation, strategy, and sovereignty, as if history has kindly reserved the stage just for them. You pass through the room with a tray, or kneel by a hearth, or stand in the doorway waiting for instructions, and the words drift toward you anyway. Liberty, rights, tyranny, virtue, representation. Such impressive language. It would sound even better if it did not arrive in rooms cleaned and fed by unfree hands. Still, those words do not vanish once spoken. Black Americans hear them, test them, repeat them softly, and measure them against reality. A phrase taken lightly by a gentleman after supper may become precious in another mouth. A biblical verse about deliverance may gather new force when spoken in a prayer meeting. A newspaper item read aloud for amusement may settle into memory with astonishing seriousness. Ideas move sideways. They escape their original owners. That is one of the few reliable pleasures of history. Taverns are especially rich ground for rumour. Sailors come in with salt still in their clothes and stories from New York, Charleston, the Chesapeake, or the Caribbean. Teamsters swear the roads are full of militia. Merchants speak of shortages, seizures, and troop movements. Soldiers brag, complain, exaggerate, and drink. Black labourers working nearby, serving food, cleaning mugs, tending horses, or carrying barrels can gather more from a noisy evening than a printed notice might reveal in a week. The trick is sorting sense from performance. Men in taverns are not always known for restraint. Army camps generate their own forms of talk. Black men attached to military service, whether as soldiers, guides, labourers, teamsters, or servants, pass along news quickly. So do washerwomen, cooks, and camp followers, who often know more than officers assume. Camps are full of movement. Orders change, units march, supplies fail to arrive, deserters appear, prisoners exchange stories. In such places, rumour has boots on. It rarely stays still for long. Among enslaved communities, information often travels through social networks invisible to white observers or simply beneath their notice. A woman visiting a neighbouring property on an errand can bring back more than flour. A ferryman can hear names and destinations. A preacher can carry ideas in the language of scripture. A market seller can learn which roads are watched and which are not. Children overhear things adults think they are too young to understand, then repeat them with astonishing precision at exactly the wrong or right moment. Households, fields, kitchens, and wharves form a living web of communication. Messages are not always verbal. A packed bag near the door means something. Extra cornmeal hidden away means something. A certain hymn sung with unusual force means something. A man asking too casually about the timing of patrols means something. Silence can mean something too, especially when people are waiting to see whether a rumour proves true before shaping their lives around it. Hope makes people attentive. Fear makes them expert. The largest and most dangerous rumours often concern British offers of freedom. During the war, British commanders at different times and in different places promised liberty to enslaved people who escape rebel masters and support the crown. The idea spreads far beyond the exact wording of any proclamation. It becomes larger than official policy, almost mythical in its reach. To some, it sounds like deliverance. To others, like bait on a hook. Both readings have good reason behind them. For an enslaved person, the British line can appear as a doorway in the distance, hard to reach, poorly lit, surrounded by danger, yet still a doorway. The journey might mean sneaking out at night, crossing unfamiliar land, evading patrols, surviving dogs, hunger, and betrayal, only to arrive in camp and face new risks from disease, overcrowding, military priorities, and officers whose promises may depend on convenience. Freedom offered in wartime is never wrapped neatly. It arrives with mud on it. Patriot promises are more tangled. In some northern areas, black men do serve in the Continental Army or in local militias, especially when manpower is scarce and earlier restrictions soften. Enlistment may bring pay, clothing, rations, and in some cases a path toward freedom. In other places, white resistance to black military service remains strong. Even where service is allowed, it does not guarantee equal treatment. You can carry a musket for liberty while hearing that liberty defined around you in very selective terms. It is enough to make a person tired without even marching. Historians still disagree about how widely enslaved people understood the exact legal content of British and Patriot policies, or whether they responded more to rumour than to official text. But exact wording is not always the point. People living under constant constraint do not require a law lecture to recognise an opening. They need enough evidence to risk moving toward it. A promise heard imperfectly can still change a life, if it sounds more possible than the life already being endured. Rumour also concerns more intimate matters. Is a certain master considering manumission? Has a widow released her servants in her will? Are Quakers in one area helping petition against slavery? Did a free black family buy land nearby? Is a ship leaving soon? Has a husband reached the city safely? Did a daughter sold last year send word through someone at market? These are not the grand declarations of famous men, yet they may matter more. History often enters through the side door. You notice how rumour changes the body. Good news, or what seems like good news, straightens the back. People speak lower, faster, closer together. Eyes sharpen. Bad news makes the shoulders sag or the jaw tighten. A false report can leave a bitter taste all evening. Waiting for confirmation is its own labour. The mind keeps working while the hands are occupied, turning possibilities over like stones in a pocket. A quirky detail from the era survives in accounts of people using literacy in creative ways. Some black Americans could read, despite laws, discouragement, or lack of formal schooling, and a single literate person in a community could act as a quiet amplifier of information. A newspaper scrap, a letter, a military notice, or a broadside might be read aloud, summarized, interpreted, and then carried further by memory. Words moved from print into voice, from voice into plan. Literacy was never the only path for news, but when present, it could feel almost like a lantern in a dark room. Religious language often serves as another vessel for rumour. News of worldly events slips naturally into sermons, testimonies, and prayers. Pharaoh and deliverance, exile and return, bondage and redemption. These themes are already there, waiting. A gathering framed as worship may also be an exchange of intelligence, comfort, warning, and cautious hope. White observers sometimes notice the hymn. They miss the strategy. Not every rumour leads toward freedom. Some lead toward panic. Stories of slave patrols growing harsher, of suspected plots, of brutal punishment for runaways, or of disease in military camps can stop people in their tracks. So can reports of ships refusing black refugees, or commanders changing policy, or local authorities demanding papers more aggressively than before. Hope in 1780 has rivals. They're loud, organised, and armed, and yet rumour remains powerful because it gives shape to possibility before possibility is visible. A person living in bondage may know almost nothing certain about the wider war, but even a half-believed report can loosen the grip of inevitability. That is no small thing. Slavery relies not only on force, but on the constant rehearsal of power as unchangeable. Rumour interrupts that lesson. It says the world may be moving. It says decisions are being made elsewhere. It says white control is not as complete as it pretends to be. In practical terms, people respond carefully. A woman may save extra food without explaining why. A man may ask indirect questions about river crossings. A free black sailor may memorize the name of a British ship said to accept refugees. An enslaved worker may watch how often the master rides away and how late he returns. A family may speak in hints around children until they are sure the children will not repeat dangerous details in the yard. Listening becomes a discipline. So does withholding reaction. Even people who distrust every promise still feel the pressure of rumour. To dismiss it entirely may be safer, but it is also difficult when every day already contains danger. If the present offers little security, then even uncertain alternatives begin to exert a pull. You do not need to be naive to feel it. You only need to be human. By the time darkness settles, the stories of the day have spread into places formal history rarely records. Into cabins lit by embers, into lofts above stables, into corners of kitchens after the household sleeps, into shared blankets, whispered marriages, tense friendships, guarded prayers. Some rumours will fade by morning, some will prove false, some will return changed, a few will become action. Those are the ones that matter most. You end the night in a world where freedom is still not secure, but no longer entirely unimaginable. That is what rumour does in 1780. It creates a trembling line between what is and what might be. It carries danger in every direction, because false hope can wound as surely as open force. Yet it also carries something harder to extinguish. Not confidence, not safety, something quieter. The suspicion that history has started to shift, and that even those denied power may hear the floorboards move first. At some point, rumour hardens into choice. Not a clean choices, of course. Not the sort that polite history likes to lay out in tidy columns, with motives in one row and outcomes in another. In 1780, for black Americans caught between empires, armies, and owners, every decision carries fog around it. You're asked, in effect, to gamble with your life using information gathered from whispers, glances, changing uniforms, and promises made by men who often value you only when you are useful. The war opens paths that did not exist before, or at least did not exist so visibly. That is the first fact. The second is less comforting. Most of those paths are lined with risk. To remain where you are can be dangerous. To flee can be dangerous. To join one side can end in betrayal. To trust neither side may still leave you crushed between them. Survival becomes a form of calculation so constant it almost replaces rest. For some black men, the Patriot cause offers one possible route. Military service in the Continental Army or state forces can mean wages, rations, clothing, movement, and sometimes emancipation, especially in the North. In places where enlistment rules loosen, a musket becomes more than a weapon. It becomes a bargaining chip, a claim, a possible document in human form. A uniform says that someone in authority, somewhere, has counted your body as necessary to the struggle. That is not equality. Still, necessity can create openings where morality has been disappointingly late to arrive. The experience varies wildly. One man may enlist directly as a free labourer or soldier. Another may be sent in place of an enslaver, with the promise of freedom afterward. Another may join because he has few other means to eat through the winter. Some black soldiers fight in integrated units, especially in northern regiments. Others serve in more limited roles or encounter white resistance at every turn. A government that speaks grandly of liberty remains capable of being fussy about who gets to carry it on their shoulder, and yet, service can matter deeply. Military pay, however irregular, offers a degree of independence. Marching beyond the immediate reach of a master changes the mental map of the world. Camp life brings contact with men from other colonies, other black communities, other ideas. A soldier may learn to read orders, understand routes, manage equipment, or navigate bureaucratic structures that civilians rarely touch. Even hardship expands knowledge. Once you have crossed rivers, slept in rough encampments, heard cannon at dawn, and stood in line beside men who once imagined you beneath notice, your sense of what is possible cannot remain entirely the same. Still, choosing the Patriot's side demands a certain tolerance for contradiction. You may be asked to defend a revolution led by slaveholders. You may hear speeches on natural rights, while your own status hangs on technicalities. You may march under officers who rely on your steadiness in battle, but hesitate to shake your hand afterward. One could develop a truly majestic level of cynicism under such conditions. Many probably did. Then there is the British option, powerful in imagination and often desperate in practice. For enslaved people owned by rebels, the Crown can appear as the side more likely to unsettle slavery. Not from compassion exactly, but from military strategy. British proclamations and practices offering freedom to those who flee rebel masters ripple outward with enormous force. To reach British lines is to attempt a physical break with bondage, not merely a philosophical objection to it. The act of escape itself demands nerve, timing, and luck. A person may leave at night with almost nothing. Food must be hidden ahead of time or stolen in a single dangerous moment. Rivers have to be crossed, patrols avoided, dogs outwitted. Children complicate every movement, yet love rarely makes people less willing to risk everything. Sometimes families flee together. Sometimes one person goes first, hoping to send word later. Sometimes that word never comes. The road to promised freedom is crowded with absences. Once at British lines, reality can disappoint. Camps are overcrowded. Disease moves quickly. Supplies run short. Officers change. Commanders retreat. Ships fill. Some refugees are welcomed as labourers, guides, servants, or soldiers. Others are viewed as burdens. Freedom promised in one place may be hedged in another. A war is not a careful institution. It uses people at speed. Even so, many choose this road because imperfect possibility outweighs certain bondage. There is a brutal clarity to that arithmetic. Women face choices just as consequential, though the surviving records often treat them as background figures rather than strategic actors. That is nonsense. Of course, black women weigh decisions about escape, military attachment, domestic service, camp life, and family survival with extraordinary care. A woman may flee to British lines because remaining means continued exploitation in a rebel household. She may attach herself to a military camp as a laundress or cook because armies need support work and movement offers a chance at autonomy. She may remain in place because she has small children, an elderly parent, or too little trustworthy information to risk the road. None of these choices are passive. All are tactical. For free black Americans, the calculations are different, but no less tense. A free man in a contested region may join a militia to protect his community or to strengthen his legal standing. He may avoid service because capture could erase his freedom in practice. No matter what papers he carries, a free sailor might choose routes based on which port is safer, which commander is less predatory, which crew asks fewer questions. A free woman supporting a household through washing, sewing, or market work may decide that visible neutrality is the best protection, even while quietly aiding relatives who think otherwise. Historians still debate how much ideology shaped Black wartime choices compared with immediate survival. Some scholars emphasize the appeal of revolutionary language and anti-slavery principle. Others note that practical concerns often dominated who offered the clearest route out of slavery, who controlled the nearest roads, who could feed refugees, who might honor a promise once the shooting stopped. These explanations do not cancel one another. Human beings are fully capable of seeking both dignity and dinner at the same time. There are also those who choose neither banner with enthusiasm. They stay near home, keep their heads down, and try to survive the convulsions of war without giving themselves too openly to either side. This may sound cautious, but caution is not cowardice when every armed force in sight can exploit you. An enslaved man might delay escape because his wife is on another property, and he cannot bear to leave without her. A free family might avoid military entanglement because one accusation could unravel years of fragile stability. A woman might continue serving in a white household while secretly gathering intelligence, waiting for a safer chance to act. Standing still, in wartime, can itself be a choice made under pressure. Some choices are forced by others. Masters may send enslaved men into military service in exchange for payment or substitute arrangements. British officers may recruit labour aggressively. Patriot authorities may press free black workers into support roles. In such cases, the language of decision becomes slippery. You choose within a cage, perhaps, but the cage remains. Even so, people improvise within constraint. A man compelled into service may still use the movement to seek freedom. A woman ordered to travel with a household may use that journey to reconnect with kin or gather information. Agency in this world is rarely pure. It is negotiated, seized in fragments, or hidden inside obedience. The atmosphere around these decisions is thick with bodily sensation. The damp of a riverbank while waiting for the moon to slide behind clouds. The rough edge of a pass folded into a pocket. The weight of a musket unfamiliar in your hands. Wool scratching at the neck of a uniform coat. The metallic smell of fear in the mouth just before stepping onto a road that could lead anywhere. Decision is not abstract when your whole body is listening for hoofbeats. Quirky details from the period reveal how improvised these choices could be. Some black refugees reached British lines by posing as servants on errands, using ordinary domestic movement as cover. Some black soldiers in Patriot service became valued musicians as well as fighters, because drums and fifes mattered for military order. A man might carry liberty in one hand and a rhythm in the other. History can be unexpectedly specific that way. The uncertainty never really lifts. A Patriot victory may strengthen one region while making another more dangerous. A British retreat can strand those who trusted its promises. A commander's death, a disease outbreak, a harsh winter, a flooded road, a missed rendezvous, all can transform a sensible decision into disaster. Yet people choose anyway. That is what stands out most. Not recklessness, not confusion. Courage under impossible conditions, sharpened by realism. You also notice how often family and community shape these calculations. People rarely decide in isolation. A man considers what his absence will mean for those he leaves behind. A woman judges whether camp life is survivable for a child. Friends compare rumours and test each other's trustworthiness. Elders advise caution or urgency depending on what they have already seen in life. Some urge flight, some warn against promises from any white power. Both positions have earned their wisdom honestly. By nightfall, the road of decision still does not look clear. One direction points toward the Patriot cause, where service may bring recognition, pay, or release, but never certainty. Another points toward British lines, where escape may crack slavery open while exposing refugees to hunger, disease, and military indifference. A third path remains in place, steadying the household, protecting kin, waiting for a better chance, or simply enduring because endurance is the only resource currently at hand. None of these options can be called safe. Some barely deserve to be called options at all. And yet this is the reality of black life in wartime America. Choice exists, but under pressure. Freedom appears, but in fragments. Allegiance is not a matter of neat patriotic feeling. It is a hard reckoning with power, geography, family, and rumour. You pick your way through it as best you can, knowing that a wrong step may not be recognisable until far too late. The war asks everyone to choose sides. For black Americans in 1780, the harder question is which side, if any, can be made to serve the cause of staying alive and, with luck, becoming unowned. In 1780, love has to be practical if it wants to survive, not less tender, not less deep. Just practical in the way a candle flame must be practical when the room is full of draughts. Black families across the colonies, whether enslaved or free, build their lives under conditions designed to interrupt them. Marriage can be blessed by a minister, recognized by a community, or understood only by the two people making promises in a world that offers very little protection for promises. Parenting is full of care, pride, instruction, and fear. Kinship stretches beyond the household because it often has to. Blood matters. So do chosen bonds, godparents, elders, neighbours, and anyone willing to hold a life together when law refuses. You begin with a couple trying to make ordinary devotion out of extraordinary instability. A man may belong to one household, a woman to another, perhaps on neighbouring farms, perhaps several miles apart, perhaps in different towns entirely. They marry in the eyes of their community, if not the law. They visit when they can, often at night, often after a full day of labour, walking roads that are dark, muddy, and closely watched. The journey itself becomes part of marriage. So does the uncertainty of whether the next visit will be allowed, possible, or safe. For enslaved people, family has always lived under the shadow of sale. That shadow does not fall every day in visible form, but it never quite leaves the room. A debt, an estate division, a quarrel, a widowhood, a crop failure, a move, a whim disguised as management. Any of these can tear a household apart. Parents know this. Children sense it earlier than adults wish. The result is a life shaped not only by affection, but by preparation for interruption. Names are repeated carefully. Family lines are recited. Places are remembered. Skills are taught young. You preserve what can travel. A mother's work includes more than feeding and comforting. She teaches alertness, which white voices signal danger, how to stand still without seeming stubborn, when to speak and when silence is safer, how to carry water without spilling, how to keep a small child quiet when footsteps pass outside, how to recognize kin by more than face alone, by gesture, by song, by a way of laughing. These lessons are intimate and unsentimental. Childhood contains play, but instruction presses close beside it. Fathers, too, carve out authority where formal power denies them. A father may not be legally able to protect his children from sale, yet he can teach tools, prayer, memory, posture, farming knowledge, fishing tricks, road sense, or the careful art of judging another person's mood. He can model steadiness. He can tell stories at night that place a child inside a larger human history than slavery wants to allow. He can become a source of selfhood in a system determined to assign worth from outside. That kind of fatherhood does not fit neatly into official records. It still matters immensely. Grandparents often hold families together in quieter ways. An older woman may know births, deaths, kin lines, herbal remedies, midwifery practices, and the stories attached to each branch of a family. An older man may carry memories of Africa, the Middle Passage, earlier masters, past migrations, or long-vanished places that younger people know only through his voice. Elders can become living archives, though no one calls them that at the time. They are simply the people who remember what others are trying to erase. In free black households, family life can seem more secure, but only by comparison. Legal marriage may be possible in some places, property may be held, wages may support a rented room or modest home, a child may sleep in the same place each night without fearing sudden sale. These are enormous differences, yet free families still live under racist laws, economic insecurity, harassment, and the constant risk that their freedom will be doubted, challenged, or ignored. Stability exists, though it remains fragile enough to keep everyone alert. The home itself may be little more than a cabin, loft, back room, a rented corner, or shared structure with thin walls and uneven floors. Still, people make homes from very little: a folded quilt, a clean table, herbs hung to dry, a stool repaired 3 times rather than discarded, a spoon kept from a dead relative, a lullaby repeated over a cradle, the smell of cornmeal porridge or rice at evening, smoke clinging to rafters, a baby's breath against a shoulder. Home is not grandeur, it is repetition with love in it. Children live at the centre of this emotional world. Their laughter can briefly soften a day. Their illnesses can fill a room with dread. Their growth brings pride and also fresh fear, because every new ability can make them more useful in the eyes of an owner. A child strong enough to carry, sweep, weed, or nurse smaller children begins to enter labour's orbit. Parents notice that shift with mixed feelings. Competence helps survival. Competence also attracts demand. Naming carries weight. A name may honour a grandparent, a biblical figure, an African memory carried in altered form, a beloved friend, or even a compromise with the naming habits of a master's household. Names can hold dignity inside systems that try to reduce people to inventory. A mother repeating a child's full name at night is doing more than calling him to bed. She is asserting personhood in a world eager to abridge it. Marriage customs vary by region and circumstance. Some couples jump a broom in a community-recognised ritual. Some exchange vows privately. Some gain a minister's blessing. Some cannot formalise anything because law refuses to acknowledge the union. Yet the emotional substance remains: shared labour, shared grief, shared plans whispered under blankets, shared tenderness in the few hours left after exhausting days. A relationship does not become less real because a court will not record it. Historians still argue about how much continuity enslaved families could maintain across generations in different regions, because the evidence shifts from place to place. In some areas, especially where slave populations were more settled, long kin networks did survive and shape community life powerfully. In other regions, sale and migration fractured households more often. Both realities existed. The larger truth is that black families built durable bonds even when the surrounding system was openly organised to make durability difficult. Separation is the great wound running through all of this. A spouse hired out to another town, a child sent away with a married daughter of the master, a brother sold to settle accounts, a mother dead in childbirth, a father gone with an army, a girl moved into domestic service miles from her cousins. Absence becomes a familiar presence, if that makes sense, sitting beside the hearth like another person no one invited. Families adapt by keeping memory active. They tell children who belongs to whom. They mark features, habits, and talents. He has his uncle's hands. She sings like her grandmother. That scar came from a cooking pot in the old place. Memory becomes a kind of map. And then there are the chosen ties, the people who become aunt, uncle, sister, elder, or godparent through care rather than blood. In communities under pressure, such ties are essential. A woman whose child has been sold may pour her tenderness into another child nearby. A widower may be absorbed into a wider household. Teenagers may be guided by older workers who teach them not only labour, but emotional survival. Chosen kin are not substitutes for lost family. They are proof that family can still grow in damaged ground. There are small and surprisingly warm details in family life that history sometimes lets slip through. Parents carve toys from scraps of wood, Children invent games with pebbles, sticks, shells, string, or bones. Someone tells a teasing story that makes a whole room laugh after a hard day. A girl learns to braid hair with particular elegance. A boy memorizes bird calls and shows off shamelessly. A grandmother complains about everyone's manners while saving the best portion for the youngest child. These moments matter because they reveal a full humanity too often flattened into tragedy alone. Touch is everywhere in family life. A hand smoothing a child's hair, a shoulder offered in comfort, the weight of a sleeping toddler, fingers checking for fever, arms linked during prayer, the roughness of homespun against a baby's cheek, the quiet pressure of two people sitting close after a day when privacy has been scarce. Affection often has to speak softly, but it speaks. Religious practice can deepen family bonds as well. Parents teach prayers, scripture passages, hymns, and moral warnings shaped by their own experience. A child may learn that God hears the lowly, that deliverance comes in many forms, that dignity is not granted by owners. In some households, African spiritual memories and Christian forms mingle in ways no census taker could ever fully detect. The sacred enters domestic life through repetition, rhythm, and the authority of elders. For free black families, another concern rises alongside affection and daily survival respectability as protection. Clean clothing, careful speech in public, church membership, property ownership, apprenticeships, documented marriages, all can help defend a family's standing in a hostile society. Yet this burden is heavy. It means ordinary domestic order must also function as a shield against scrutiny. A family is asked not only to live, but to prove constantly that it deserves the right to do so undisturbed. War makes everything more uncertain. Men disappear into armies, roads become riskier, food prices rise, refugees move through towns. Disease follows camps and crowds. Letters, when they exist at all, are delayed or lost. A wife may hear that her husband enlisted, deserted, died, or was seen in another state, and none of it may be confirmed for months. A mother may wonder whether a son who ran to British lines is free, sick, imprisoned, or already gone. Families do not merely miss one another. They live suspended inside unanswerable questions. Yet even in suspension, they keep making life. Babies are born, marriages are made, meals are stretched, children are corrected, comforted and taught, hair is combed, socks are mended, stories are told, grief is carried together when possible. Joy appears in flashes and is taken seriously when it comes. That may be the most remarkable thing of all. Black families in 1780 are denied security by law and habit, yet they continue to create belonging with stubborn artistry. By Night's End, you understand that family is not a soft subject set apart from politics and labour. It is where politics and labour land most painfully. It is where sale becomes grief, where military choice becomes separation, where law becomes a threat to the cradle and the marriage bed. But it's also where resilience takes its most intimate form, in cabins, rented rooms, alley dwellings, lofts, quarters, and scattered farmsteads. Black Americans keep loving one another under circumstances meant to thin that love into mere survival. They refuse the reduction. They hold names, stories, children, vows, recipes, jokes, prayers, and grief in a shared human bundle that no ledger can fully measure. Family remains uncertain, vulnerable, and sometimes heartbreakingly brief. It also remains the place where freedom is imagined first as something personal, not a slogan, not a speech, but the simple right to stay together. When the day's labour finally loosens its grip, another world begins to gather. It does not arrive with trumpets. It comes quietly, through footsteps on packed earth, through a low voice at a doorway, through the smell of pine smoke and the soft exchange of names in the dark. In 1780, black community life is built in hours borrowed from exhaustion, faith, memory, Music, humour, and mutual care all have to fit into the narrow spaces left behind by work, surveillance, and fear. Somehow, they do. You enter that world at dusk. The sky's dimming, and the air holds the damp smell of grass, ash, wool, and evening food. Somewhere a pot still simmers. Somewhere a baby is being rocked to sleep. Somewhere someone is rubbing sore hands and staring into a fire, waiting for strength to return. Then a neighbour appears with a reason to linger. A cousin stops by. An elder asks after the sick child. A young man brings a bit of news. A woman carries herbs wrapped in cloth. Community is rarely announced. It accumulates. For black Americans, especially the enslaved, community is not a luxury. It is protection, instruction, emotional shelter, and at times the only real structure of belonging that cannot be bought or sold outright. The law may define people as property. Community insists they are kin, friends, witnesses, mourners, believers, helpers, jokers, singers, and keepers of one another's names. That insistence matters more than it first appears. A human life can thin dangerously without it. Faith sits near the centre of this shared world, though not always in neat official forms. In some towns, black worshippers attend established churches, often segregated within them, seated in galleries, side pews, or rear benches. They hear sermons shaped by white ministers, white theology, and white assumptions. Even there, they may draw their own meanings from Scripture, especially from stories of bondage, exile, judgment, deliverance, and divine attention to the oppressed. A sermon does not remain under the control of the man who delivers it. Once heard, it begins to live in the listener. In other places, worship happens more quietly and more freely. Small prayer gatherings form in cabins, kitchens, yards, lofts, or under trees beyond the immediate reach of a household's supervision. The atmosphere changes in such gatherings. Voices lower, then rise. The night air feels close and alive. Crickets stitch sound through the pauses. A hymn begins, perhaps softly, perhaps with only a line before others join. Some songs are learned from white churches. Others carry rhythms, emphasis, and emotional textures that belong more fully to black experience. A verse may sound familiar to outsiders and mean something far deeper inside the circle. These gatherings do more than express belief. They create emotional order in a life otherwise shaped by someone else's commands. Prayer gives language to grief. Song gives rhythm to endurance. Testimony lets one person's suffering and hope become shared property. A woman whose child is ill can be held in communal concern. A man uncertain whether to flee can hear others weigh courage against danger. An elder can remind the young that sorrow is real, but not the whole story. The spiritual and the practical sight together without embarrassment. Music is especially powerful because it travels where paper often cannot. A tune can be remembered by children, altered by singers, adapted to different settings, and carried across counties without leaving a trace in formal records. Clapping, humming, foot tapping, body rhythm, and call and response all help shape an atmosphere that is at once communal and intimate. Music can lighten a burden for a few minutes. It can also preserve a people's emotional world when the surrounding society has little interest in preserving anything except their labour. There is humour here too, and that matters. White descriptions of the period often flatten black life into toil and silence, but people laugh because people must. They laugh at pompous masters, at spoiled children in fine clothes, at a mule with too much personality, at a preacher who grows dramatic over very ordinary sins, at weather that ruins everyone's plans, at the ridiculous gap between revolutionary language and revolutionary behaviour. Gentle sarcasm is not only entertaining, it is a form of intelligence. It refuses to let power define reality without comment. Storytelling keeps community stitched together as well, in the quiet after supper, or while mending by the hearth, or during a visit that stretches longer than it should. Stories emerge, Some are family stories about a grandparent, a lost place, a difficult birth, a clever escape from punishment, a wedding, a long walk, a boat journey, a remarkable harvest. Some are moral tales, warning the young against vanity, cruelty, boastfulness, laziness, or trust placed in the wrong person. Some are trickster stories, where wit defeats strength and the small outmaneuver the powerful. Those stories carry more than amusement. They teach survival without sounding like lectures. Memory reaches beyond the immediate household. In 1780, many black Americans are only a generation or two removed from Africa, and some were born there themselves. That means the community may include fragments of African languages, naming traditions, spiritual habits, foodways, gestures, musical patterns, and agricultural knowledge. These fragments do not always survive in pure or obvious form. They mix, adapt, fade, and reappear. A rhythm in a song, a method of preparing rice, a healing herb, a funeral custom, a way of braiding hair. Any of these might hold older worlds inside them. Historians still disagree about how much African cultural continuity remained visible in different black communities by 1780, especially between northern towns and southern plantation districts, in places with larger and more concentrated enslaved populations, especially in the Low Country. Continuities may have been stronger. In more dispersed northern settings, blending and adaptation may have worked differently, but the larger point is clear enough. Black community life was not empty space waiting to be filled by white institutions. It already contained inherited knowledge, reshaped under pressure, but not extinguished. Mutual care is one of the most striking features of this world. A woman skilled in herbal remedies may treat fevers, coughs, stomach troubles, or birthing pains for several households, using roots, leaves, poultices, and teas learned from elders or from accumulated experience. A man handy with tools may repair a stool, patch a roof, or strengthen a door for a neighbour after finishing his own labour. Someone shares salt, someone lends a blanket, someone watches a child while the mother is called away. None of this makes life easy. It makes it livable. Sickness tests community severely. In a world without modern medicine, illness can turn alarming very quickly. A fever rises, a cough deepens, a wound festers, a child fails to eat. In such moments, community becomes practical and immediate. Water is fetched, herbs are brewed, extra hands manage chores. People sit through the night with the sick when they can. Prayers are said, songs murmured, cloths changed, stories offered to distract or comfort. Whether the patient recovers or not, no one faces it entirely alone if the community can help it. Mourning, too, belongs to the group. Death in black communities is shaped by love, memory, and often by painful limits imposed from outside. Burial may be hurried, supervised, or materially sparse, yet mourners bring dignity through song, spoken remembrance, careful preparation of the body when possible, and the refusal to let the dead disappear into mere labour statistics. Names are repeated, kin are identified, stories are told. Grief becomes communal, so that no one person has to carry all its weight in silence. A quirky detail from the era lies in the small economies that often grew around community ties. Black women in some towns sold cakes, fruit, herbs, or cooked food not only for income, but as part of a local web of exchange and recognition. A market stall could become a place of gossip, warning, recommendation, and emotional connection as much as commerce. A person might come for a loaf and leave with news, a prayer, and a reminder to check on a widow. The transaction was never just the transaction. Children are folded into community from the beginning. They listen while adults talk, though adults often pretend not to notice. They absorb songs before they understand every word. They learn who can be trusted, who is strict, who tells the best stories, who knows remedies, who prays beautifully, who can carve toys, who keeps chickens, who will scold them properly if needed. A community raises children not only because it is ideal, but because under slavery and racial hostility, it is necessary. The risks are too large for isolated parenting. You also notice the importance of space, even tiny amounts of it. A corner of a cabin cleared for worship, a patch of yard where women can talk while shelling peas, a path to the well that allows brief private exchange, a loft where young people whisper, a hidden clearing in the woods where voices can rise a little more freely. Place shapes feeling. Even the smallest protected space can hold surprising amounts of emotional life. Touch and atmosphere matter deeply here. The warmth of bodies gathered close in winter, the rough texture of a handmade bench, the weight of a child sleeping across a lap while adults continue talking, the smell of sage, smoke, and worn wool, the trembling candlelight that makes faces appear and fade, the sound of someone singing a line alone before the room joins in. These details are not decoration. They are the texture of human continuity. Faith in this setting is rarely abstract. It is not a tidy set of doctrines arranged politely on a shelf. It is lived in the body and tested in the day. Can God see this suffering? Can the dead be entrusted somewhere safe? Does justice exist beyond the master's yard? Is endurance itself a holy act? Such questions do not always receive calm answers. Sometimes faith means certainty. Sometimes it means pleading. Sometimes it means singing because ordinary speech is not enough. Community also provides moral witness. When a person is humiliated, beaten, sold, widowed, or made desperate, others see it and remember it. That memory matters. A system of domination prefers each wound to seem isolated, private, and inevitable. Community says otherwise. It says this happened to someone we know. It says the harmed person belongs to us. It says suffering has witnesses, and witnesses can carry truth farther than official records. By the time the night deepens, you understand that black communal life in 1780 is one of the great quiet achievements of the era. It grows under pressure, without formal protection, often without permanent buildings, legal recognition, or safety from intrusion. Yet it nourishes faith, preserves memory, shares practical help, raises children, honours the dead, and makes joy possible in narrow spaces. It creates a human atmosphere stronger than the rules intended to thin it away. In cabins, church galleries, markets, yards, hidden clearings, and dim kitchens, Black Americans gather themselves into a people again and again, not by accident, by effort, by ritual, by voice, by care, and by the stubborn conviction that no one should have to endure the world entirely alone. Morning in 1780 does not feel softer just because the sun rises. Law is already awake before you are. It waits in courthouse steps, in a folded pass, in a constable's question, in a master's threat, in the public reading of notices, in the casual confidence of white men who assume the rules were built for their comfort. For Black Americans, especially the enslaved, law is rarely a shield. More often it is a fence, a net, or a stick carried with paperwork attached. You notice first how unevenly authority appears. In one place it comes dressed in official clothes, with seals, signatures, and clerks. In another it arrives as a plantation overseer with a ledger and a temper. In a town it may be the watch, stopping people after dark and demanding proof of identity or purpose. In the countryside it can be a patrol rider asking where you are headed and who permitted it. The forms differ. The message stays familiar. Your movement, labour, and body are subject to inspection. Enslaved life is held together by force, but force prefers legal clothing when available. Bills of sale, estate inventories, inheritance disputes, debt settlements, and property claims all turn human lives into entries on paper. A child can be listed beside livestock, furniture, or tools with the same terrible calm. It is one of the great icy habits of the age. Violence likes to imagine itself orderly. A clean column of figures does not make the human cost less brutal. It only makes the brutality bureaucratic. For free black Americans, the law offers a different kind of uncertainty. Freedom may rest on certificates, manumission papers, baptism records, military discharge documents, or testimony from white neighbours. These papers must often be carried, guarded, and produced on demand. A crease in the wrong place, a lost page, a sceptical magistrate, a drunken constable, or a neighbour with bad intentions can turn legal status into an argument. In theory, freedom exists. In practice, it can be forced to defend itself every few miles. Courthouses are strange spaces for black people in this world. They can be terrifying, humiliating, and yet occasionally necessary. Some enslaved people petition for freedom, especially in places where revolutionary language, religious anti-slavery sentiment, or changing state law creates narrow openings. Some free black people go to court over wages, property, debt, kidnapping, assault, or contested status. Entering that space means stepping into a language not designed for you, before officials who may doubt your word before you have opened your mouth. Still, some go. Necessity makes brave petitioners out of people who are never invited to be citizens. The act of petitioning itself is remarkable. A black person, or someone on their behalf, lays out a claim in careful language, appealing to precedent, justice, service, baptism, parentage, or the principles newly fashionable among revolutionaries. Perhaps a man argues that military service earned the liberty promised him. Perhaps a woman claims illegal enslavement based on her mother's free status. Perhaps a family seeks recognition of a manumission delayed or disputed after an owner's death. These are not grand theatrical moments most of the time. They are painstaking, anxious, and often fragile. Yet they reveal an important truth. Black Americans were not waiting passively for freedom to arrive wrapped in good manners. They were pressing claims where they could. Historians still argue about how much faith black petitioners placed in the legal system itself, as opposed to using it simply because no better instrument was available. That uncertainty feels honest. A person can distrust a court and still recognize that a signature from the right official might save a child from seizure or secure a promised emancipation. Hope in legal channels did not require innocence. It only required desperation mixed with strategy. Violence shadows all of this. Punishment under slavery is both personal and public. It can be threatened in a kitchen, carried out in a yard, or made visible enough to instruct others. White households and plantation regimes rely not only on direct pain, but on anticipation. The body learns fear from sound as much as touch. A raised voice at the wrong hour, boots approaching too quickly, the snap of a strap being handled, the silence that falls when something bad is about to happen. Even people not directly punished feel the atmosphere change, and yet, open violence is only one part of the system. There is also coercion through sale, separation, deprivation, hiring out, withheld passes, denied visits, confiscated earnings, and the constant reminder that your nearest bonds can be disrupted by someone else's decision. Punishment does not always need spectacle. It can arrive as paperwork. A woman is told her husband cannot visit. A man discovers his child has been sent elsewhere. A skilled worker sees promised freedom delayed again. These acts may not leave bruises on the skin. They leave them elsewhere. Negotiation becomes a daily art precisely because force is so present. Black Americans bargain for food, time, movement, family visits, clothing, tasks, wages, and treatment whenever they can. The bargain may be spoken directly or shaped indirectly through performance, patience, timing, or reputation. An enslaved driver trusted with organizing labor might push quietly for lighter punishment on another worker. A cook may gain an hour to visit kin by ensuring a household dinner goes especially smoothly. A hired laborer might negotiate to keep a tiny portion of wages. A free woman taking in washing may press a customer for payment by invoking church ties or public shame. None of this overturns the larger structure. It creates breathing room within it. That breathing room matters enormously. A pass to travel on Sunday can mean seeing a spouse. An extra blanket can protect a child through winter. Permission to garden after assigned work can provide food beyond bare rations. A small cash payment can help buy cloth, shoes, or medicine. Negotiation is not freedom, but it often keeps people alive long enough to continue seeking more than survival. In some northern places, changing legal culture begins to create tiny cracks in slavery's authority. Revolutionary rhetoric unsettles old certainties. Certain judges, legislators, ministers, and reform-minded whites become more willing to hear anti-slavery arguments, at least in principle. Black petitioners and their allies sometimes use this language sharply, asking how a people fighting for liberty can justify lifelong bondage. It is a devastating question, though white society proves surprisingly nimble at sidestepping devastating questions when convenience is involved. In the South, where plantation wealth is more deeply tied to slavery, the legal order often hardens instead. Greater fear of escape, rebellion, or wartime instability can lead to tighter patrols, stricter movement controls, and harsher enforcement. The law there is not merely preserving slavery, it is bracing itself. Like a man digging his heels in before a heavy door bursts open, the pressure of war makes authorities more anxious, not more generous. Quirky details from the period reveal how negotiation could hide inside ordinary routines. Enslaved market sellers in some towns sometimes use their trips to build networks of exchange, quietly extending credit, sharing news, or obtaining scarce goods beyond what white employers fully monitored. A trip to market might look simple from the outside. Inside it, a dozen human calculations were underway. One basket of produce could carry commerce, gossip, medicine, warning, and future favours all at once. Courts themselves could produce strange moments. A free black man with the right papers and witnesses might win a case over unpaid wages, only to leave the courthouse and face insults or threats on the street. Legal recognition did not erase social contempt. A document could order one thing while daily custom enforced another. The world of 1780 is deeply committed to contradiction. Women often navigate these legal and social tensions with extraordinary subtlety. A black woman in domestic service may negotiate through tone, timing, emotional intelligence, and knowledge of a household's private vulnerabilities. She may know when a mistress is frightened enough to be flexible, when a child's attachment can be turned into a practical favour, when a request must sound humble, when it is wiser to ask through an intermediary, when to save a stronger appeal for church-going Sunday instead of a tense Tuesday afternoon. Her power, if that is even the right word, is narrow and risky. It is still real. Men in skilled trades sometimes bargain from usefulness. A blacksmith whose labour is hard to replace may press for better food or limited movement. A boatman familiar with local waters may gain trust that opens other small opportunities. A soldier may claim the terms of enlistment. A driver may mediate between white command and black labourers in ways that protect some and expose others. Usefulness can purchase leverage, but only temporarily. The person who profits from your skill may decide tomorrow that control matters more than efficiency. There are also informal courts of community judgment. People observe who can be trusted, who is reckless, who boasts too much, who bargains cleverly, who endangers others by talking loosely, who intervenes when someone is at risk. Reputation within black communities shapes survival just as surely as legal standing before white authorities. A person known to carry messages discreetly or nurse the sick faithfully may be protected and valued in ways no statute records. The sensory world of law and coercion is surprisingly vivid. Wax seals pressed on paper, the dusty smell inside a county office, ink staining a clerk's fingers, damp wool in a courtroom crowded with spectators, the creak of benches, the scrape of a quill. Outside, horses stamping in mud. inside a household, the cold feel of a pass held too tightly in the hand, the rough knot in your stomach while waiting for a decision made by someone who has already misjudged you. Sometimes negotiation fails, sometimes a plea is denied, a petition dismissed, a promise broken, a pass refused, a wage stolen, a family visit blocked. That reality is essential. It would be comforting to imagine that skillful bargaining regularly softened the edges of slavery and racial oppression. It did not, at least not reliably. Many people met walls harder than reason, harder than scripture, harder than wartime ideals. Yet they kept negotiating because to stop entirely would surrender every small chance at relief. By late afternoon, you begin to see law not as a distant institution but as a daily climate. It shapes who can stand where, walk when, earn what, keep which child, testify how, worship where, and travel with whom. It can arrive through a judge, a patrolman, a bill of sale, a property dispute, a military certificate, or a whispered threat from someone who knows the law will likely side with him if challenged. Against this climate, Black Americans use every available tool: documents, allies, testimony, usefulness, timing, secrecy, market exchange, church ties, and plain endurance. What emerges is not a simple story of oppression on one side and resistance on the other. It is more intricate and perhaps more exhausting. People are coerced, punished, cornered, and watched. They are also shrewd, observant, strategic, and willing to test every opening, however narrow. In 1780, justice is inconsistent, often hostile, and always entangled with race and property. Yet Black Americans continue to press against it through petitions, bargains, quiet refusals, and careful claims to personhood. The legal world rarely welcomes them. They enter it anyway, carrying papers when they can, witnesses when available, and the stubborn human insistence that even a crooked system should sometimes be forced to hear the truth. The map of freedom in 1780 is beginning to wrinkle, but it is not unfolding evenly. In some northern places, slavery has started to look less permanent than it once did. Not gone, not even close in many households, but questioned, challenged, made awkward in polite conversation, which is at least a start, in the South. Meanwhile, slavery remains deeply planted, tied to land, wealth, and social order so tightly that any looseness feels to white planters like a threat to the whole world they have built. For Black Americans, this means the same year can hold very different futures depending on where your feet touch the ground. You begin in the North, where revolutionary ideals have created an opening, however narrow, for anti-slavery arguments. The language of natural rights, once spoken mainly against British rule, now floats uncomfortably close to the subject of human bondage. Some white Americans notice the contradiction and feel a genuine moral unease. Others notice it only when pressed and would prefer everyone move along before dessert is served. Still, the contradiction is out in the room now, and it is not easy to make it disappear. In places like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and parts of the Mid-Atlantic, slavery still exists in 1780, but pressure is building against it. Free black communities are more visible in certain towns. Some enslaved people bring freedom suits. Some white reformers, especially certain Quakers and other religious critics of slavery, speak more boldly than before. Newspapers carry debates. Legislators fumble toward measures that seem humane so long as they do not inconvenience too many influential men too quickly. Progress, as ever, arrives with a limp. For Black Americans in the North, this shifting atmosphere can feel both promising and maddening. A free black man in a city may hear serious talk of liberty and imagine a future in which his children stand on firmer ground than he does. An enslaved woman may hear of a petition, a court case, or a gradual emancipation proposal and wonder whether her own condition might someday change. Yet daily life remains constrained. She still cooks the meal. He still risks harassment in the street. Freedom discussed in public does not immediately alter the next morning's labour. Gradual emancipation, where it emerges, carries its own peculiar cruelty. It offers change, but slowly, often protecting the property claims of enslavers, while placing the full moral drama of freedom somewhere conveniently in the future. Children born after a certain date may be slated for eventual liberty, but only after long terms of service. Adults already enslaved may remain so for life. It is a system that allows white society to congratulate itself while asking black people for yet more patience. History is full of reforms that expect the injured to wait quietly while others adjust. Still, these northern changes are not meaningless. Legal cracks matter. Court victories matter. The visible growth of free black households matters. Black military service in northern states matters too, because it strengthens claims to citizenship, wages, respectability, and freedom, even when full equality remains stubbornly out of reach. A uniform cannot erase prejudice, but it can complicate the story white society tells about who belongs. In northern port cities, you can feel this transitional world in daily life. Black sailors move through harbours with a degree of mobility unknown to many rural labourers. Free black women sell goods, take in washing, nurse children, or maintain households with fragile but real independence. Churches and mutual aid connections begin to form stronger urban roots. A child growing up in such a setting may see free black adults living under their own names, renting rooms, earning wages, marrying, baptizing children, and appearing in public not as household property but as persons. That vision alone can reshape imagination. Yet northern freedom is never clean. Kidnapping remains a threat. Racist restrictions linger in employment, voting, schooling, and public life. White resentment can sharpen precisely where slavery begins to weaken, as though the fading of ownership must be compensated for by louder social contempt. A free black person may stand legally outside slavery, while remaining painfully inside a racial hierarchy that seeks fresh methods of control. The chains may change form before they disappear. Historians still debate how revolutionary northern anti-slavery really was in 1780, or whether many white northerners simply found slavery less economically central and therefore easier to criticize. That question matters because motives shape institutions. A society that ends slavery reluctantly, for mixed reasons, may still preserve deep racial inequality afterward. Inference suggests that many northern changes were morally significant and materially limited at the same time. The door opened, but not very wide. Now you turn south, and the atmosphere changes almost at once. The plantations are larger. The labour system is more central to wealth. White fear runs deeper, because the number of enslaved people is greater, and the economy rests more openly on their forced work. Here the revolutionary language of liberty does not dissolve slavery. It often hardens white determination to defend it. Freedom for planters and bondage for labourers can coexist quite comfortably in southern political thought, provided no one points too directly at the contradiction. In the Chesapeake and the lower South, black life remains dominated by plantation rhythms, agricultural demands, and legal systems built to secure racial control. Tobacco, rice, indigo, and other staple crops tie human bondage to export wealth so visibly that white elites treat slavery not as an embarrassing inconsistency, but as a necessity. The fields, the ledgers, the shipping networks, the inherited estates, all depend on it. A planter may speak elegantly of rights while calculating the price of a child. This is not hypocrisy hidden in a corner. It is social order standing in broad daylight. Southern enslaved communities develop rich internal worlds under these conditions, but the surrounding regime is severe. Patrols are active, movement is watched, punishment is swift. The possibility of wartime escape to British lines creates both hope among the enslaved and panic among whites. As a result, some southern authorities respond by tightening surveillance, curbing mobility, and treating any sign of black autonomy as suspicious. Fear from above makes life below even harder, and yet the South is not without complexity. In some regions, the density of black populations allows stronger communal bonds, wider kin networks, and more sustained cultural continuities. On larger plantations, enslaved people may build relationships, worship practices, food traditions, and systems of mutual support that stretch beyond a single household. Rice regions in particular can contain social worlds where African memory remains powerful in language, labour knowledge, and shared custom. These are not free worlds, they are resilient ones. There are also small southern variations that matter. Urban centres like Charleston or Savannah create more mixed patterns of labour and contact than isolated inland plantations do. Enslaved boatmen, artisans, domestics, and market sellers may move through spaces where information travels faster and informal bargaining is more possible. Even so, the larger structure stays firmly in place. A little mobility inside slavery is still slavery. A wider street does not remove the walls. The contrast between North and South also appears in how white society imagines the future. In parts of the North, some white people can now picture a world in which slavery declines, provided the process is gradual and carefully managed. In much of the South, many whites cannot imagine their prosperity, status, or safety without it. This difference doesn't mean northern racism is mild. It means the political relationship to slavery is shifting unevenly. One region begins to edge away from the institution while carrying prejudice with it. Another clings tighter and prepares to build more upon it. A quirky detail of this regional divide lies in the different public textures of black life. In some northern towns, a passerby might see free black veterans in worn military coats, black children apprenticed into trades, or black households paying rent and attending church under their own names. In the South, a traveller might instead notice long lines of field labour, heavily supervised work gangs, or market spaces where enslaved sellers moved briskly but never beyond the reach of ownership. The contrast is not absolute, but it is visible enough to alter the emotional climate of a place. For black Americans themselves, these regional differences do not necessarily produce simple judgments. The North may offer legal openings and growing free communities, but it also exposes people to precarious wage labour, racial hostility, and uncertain enforcement of rights. The South may impose harsher bondage while still sustaining dense kinship networks and cultural strength in some districts. No region offers uncomplicated relief. Geography changes the shape of struggle, not the need for it. You can taste the difference in daily life. Northern urban food may come from wages, market purchase, kitchen scraps, and neighbourhood exchange. Southern plantation meals may depend more heavily on rations, garden plots, fishing, and what can be grown in small stolen corners of time. You can hear the difference too. Northern streets ring with carts, port noise, church bells, and layered speech from crowded blocks. Southern rural nights hold insects, frogs, distant dogs, wind through pines, and the low murmur of quarters after dark, distinct soundscapes, same longing. The legal atmosphere also divides sharply. Northern courts, in some cases, become arenas where slavery is tested and limited. Southern law is more likely to reinforce mastery and punish disorder. A paper promising freedom may carry greater potential weight in one place than another. A petition that receives hearing in Pennsylvania might meet colder ground in South Carolina. A black man who has served militarily may find his service interpreted differently depending on local culture, local judges, and how much white society currently fears black claims. This uneven map creates movement. Some black Americans seek northern cities for greater opportunity. Some attempt to follow armies towards zones of possible freedom. Some remain where family ties, danger, or simple lack of options keep them rooted. Migration is never purely voluntary in such a world. Yet people still read the map as best they can. They listen for which places are changing, which places are tightening, and where a person with skill, papers, or kin might survive with slightly more dignity. By evening, the shape of the nation looks less like one country moving together and more like separate currents pulling against each other. In the north, emancipation begins to glimmer, incomplete and compromised, but real enough to alter expectation. In the south, slavery deepens its hold, defended by wealth, fear, and habit with increasingly rigid force. Black Americans stand inside both realities at once, depending on where they live, where they labour, and what chance places in their path. This is the cruel truth of 1780. Freedom is emerging, but unevenly. Hope exists, but regionally. Law shifts in one direction here and another there. The same revolution that loosens bondage in certain northern mines helps southern slaveholders imagine new reasons to secure their power. Black life is shaped by these diverging paths every day, through work, worship, family, movement, punishment, and fragile aspiration. The nation is not simply deciding whether freedom belongs to Black Americans. It is deciding where, when, how much, and for whom. That is a colder question. It leaves the map trembling under your hands. The war does not end with a clean exhale. It sputters, drags, shifts, and finally leaves behind a country that speaks of victory with great confidence and of black freedom with much less. In 1780, that ending is not yet fully visible, but you can already feel its shape forming. The muskets, proclamations, marches, and arguments are moving towards some conclusion. The harder question is what kind of morning will follow for Black Americans when the smoke thins and the flags settle. For white Americans who support independence, the future often appears in broad, flattering colours: self-government, republican virtue, a new nation, fewer taxes, more honour, more control over destiny. For Black Americans, the picture is narrower and far more uncertain. Will military service be remembered or brushed aside? Will promises of manumission be honoured? Will British offers of protection survive military defeat? Will free black families be left in peace? Will slavery weaken under the pressure of revolutionary ideals or simply change its language and continue? No banner answers these questions by itself. You begin with the simplest and most painful truth. The revolution does not settle the status of Black Americans. It unsettles it. That can be dangerous, but it can also open possibilities. An unsettled world is harder to predict and harder to control. For people trapped in bondage, uncertainty is frightening. It is also sometimes the only crack through which change can enter. Black men who have served in patriot forces carry this uncertainty in their bodies. They return, when they return, with worn shoes, rough coats, scars, and stories. Some expect freedom because it was promised in return for enlistment, substitution, or honourable service. Some expect back pay. Some expect at least a measure of public respect. What they often meet instead is delay, dispute, evasion, or indifference. A former officer may praise a black veteran's steadiness in battle, and then fail to support his claim to emancipation. A state may celebrate sacrifice while allowing discrimination to remain ordinary. A musket laid down does not automatically produce justice. Still, military service does leave traces that matter. A black veteran may possess papers, witnesses, or a reputation that strengthens his status in a town. He may gain access to wages, land petitions, or community standing not available before. He may carry himself differently after having moved through camps and campaigns beyond the immediate control of an owner. He has seen white men afraid. He has seen them depend on black courage. That knowledge alone can alter the imagination of freedom. For those who fled to British lines, the end of war brings another kind of reckoning. Some black refugees leave with British evacuations. boarding ships to Nova Scotia, the Caribbean, London, or other uncertain destinations. For them, the war's end can mean departure rather than return, exile rather than homecoming. The promise of liberty survives, but not always on familiar soil. Families are split again by oceans, cold climates, strange towns, inadequate supplies, and fresh prejudice await many who leave. Yet departure may still be better than re-enslavement. Freedom in an unfamiliar place can look bleak and still remain precious. Others are not so fortunate. Some black people who sought British protection are captured, abandoned, or forced back into bondage when military fortunes reverse. Here the end of war feels not like victory or even transition, but like a trap closing. A promise once bright enough to risk everything for can collapse under the weight of diplomacy, retreat, or simple white determination to reclaim property. History likes a neat treaty. Lives rarely receive one. Free black communities also face the morning after with mixed prospects. In some northern places, the ideology of the revolution gives fresh language to anti-slavery arguments and helps gradual emancipation gain ground. Free black families may hope to secure marriages, baptisms, work, apprenticeships, property, and church life more firmly within the new republic. Yet every gain has a shadow. White Americans who have cast off monarchy do not suddenly cast off racial hierarchy. Many remain deeply committed to inequality, only now under a homemade flag. That homemade flag can be especially bitter in its symbolism. A nation founded in liberty proves very skilled at narrowing the meaning of liberty when black people claim it too directly. Freedom is praised as universal, then managed as selective. Citizenship is described as natural, then fenced with race, sex, and property. Equality is declared, then delayed. The new republic inherits old habits with impressive efficiency. Historians still argue over whether the revolution should be understood as a major turning point for black freedom, or as a moment of partial, highly limited change that left the core structure of racial inequality intact. Both readings capture something real. The war does create opportunities, legal challenges, emancipations, migrations, and political language that matter enormously. At the same time, it leaves millions of people unfree or precarious, especially in the South. The contradiction does not disappear. It becomes constitutional in spirit long before it is fully constitutional in text. In the North, gradual emancipation begins to shape a new kind of future, one that is hopeful and deeply compromised at once. A child born after a certain date may grow up expecting eventual freedom, though often only after years of service. A free black artisan may imagine expanding his trade. A black mother may hope her children will live less vulnerably than she has. Yet discrimination in housing, schooling, wages, public worship, and law continues to narrow every gain. Freedom from ownership does not mean freedom from humiliation. In the South, the outlook is darker. White slaveholders emerge from the Revolutionary era determined to preserve slavery more firmly, not less. Some talk of liberty as a possession for white men alone. Others avoid the contradiction by refusing to think very hard about it at all, a method popular in many times and places. Plantation wealth, land hunger, and racial fear continue to bind the region tightly to bondage. If slavery seemed morally awkward in some drawing rooms, it remained economically beloved in the fields. For enslaved people in the South, the post-war future can feel cruelly familiar. Dawn still brings labour, families are still vulnerable to sale, patrols remain active, masters still command, calculate, and punish. Yet something has changed beneath the sameness. The revolution has shown that power can fracture, armies can move, empires can lose, white authority can disagree with itself. A generation of black Americans has listened closely to claims about rights and tyranny, and those words cannot easily be pushed back into silence. Even where slavery hardens, the language around it is no longer entirely secure. The domestic sphere absorbs these changes quietly. Black parents think about what kind of world their children are entering. A father who served in the war may tell stories that enlarge a child's sense of what black courage looks like. A mother who navigated wartime upheaval may teach sharper lessons about caution, papers, movement, and trust. Elders who witnessed proclamations, evacuations, military camps, or court petitions pass these memories into family history. The war becomes not only an event, but a store of cautionary tales and fragile hopes. Religious life also changes in subtle ways. The Revolutionary era's stress on conscience and liberty can encourage some black worshippers to seek more independent spiritual space. New congregations, mutual aid habits, and forms of community discipline begin to grow. Especially where free black populations increase, the church becomes more than a place of worship. It becomes a place where the new nation can be judged against its own language, quietly, steadily, and sometimes with remarkable patience. A quirky detail of the era lies in how memory of wartime service and movement circulates through black communities. A faded military coat kept for years, a certificate folded into a Bible, a story about crossing a river at night, a name remembered from a British ship's list, a child named after a place where a parent briefly tasted liberty. These remnants are modest, almost ordinary, yet they preserve the war's emotional truth far more faithfully than triumphant speeches often do. Economic life in the New Republic remains hard. Free black labourers still compete in markets shaped by white preference and exclusion. Black women supporting families through domestic work, sewing, washing, market sales, or nursing still face low pay and heavy scrutiny. Skilled black men may find opportunity in trades and ports, yet their success can provoke resentment as much as admiration. Money helps, it does not erase race. The Republic loves industry in theory and often resents it in black hands. Law becomes the next battleground. The same political culture that celebrates rights begins to create the structures through which black Americans will press future claims. Petitions, lawsuits, church records, military service, manumission papers, tax lists, and property documents all gain importance. The courts are inconsistent, often hostile, and shaped by local prejudice. But they are now part of the terrain on which freedom will be argued. The revolution has not delivered justice. It has, in some places, made argument unavoidable. That matters because argument changes expectation. Once a society has announced that liberty is foundational, every denial of liberty becomes harder to justify without increasingly strange acrobatics of logic. White Americans are more than capable of those acrobatics, naturally. But the burden shifts. Slavery must now live beside explicit claims of equality, rather than beneath older assumptions of hierarchy alone. Black Americans see this tension clearly and learn to use it. The emotional atmosphere of the post-war moment is therefore deeply mixed. Relief and grief, pride and betrayal, exhaustion and resolve. A black veteran might feel honoured one day and insulted the next. A free black mother might celebrate a legal gain while fearing kidnapping on the road. An enslaved man might hear of northern emancipation and feel both hope and bitterness. Nothing is singular. The new nation offers no simple emotional script. You stand in this emerging republic and notice what white public memory will later try to smooth out. Independence did not arrive equally. The end of imperial rule did not mean the end of domination. The morning after victory still smelled of sweat, wood smoke, salt, mud, paper, iron, and uncertainty. Black Americans entered that morning carrying enormous labour, military sacrifice, spiritual endurance, and family loss, only to find that freedom remained partial, contested, and unevenly distributed across the map. And yet there is something undeniably significant in the air. Not triumph, exactly. Something steadier. Black Americans have tested routes to freedom, argued claims in legal language, formed communities of care, served in armies, survived dislocation, and measured the new republic against its own ideals. The nation may not wish to include them fully. but it can no longer pretend they are outside its story. They are inside it at every level, in the fields, on the docks, in the camps, in the kitchens, in the churches, in the courts, in the households, and in the arguments that will not go away. So the revolution ends where it began for many Black Americans, in a space between possibility and denial. The war has not solved the problem of freedom. It has illuminated it. It has left behind a country too proud of liberty to abandon the word and too invested in racial hierarchy to apply it honestly. That contradiction will shape generations. In 1780, you can already feel its future weight. Now the night softens around you. The noise of marching fades. The shouting in taverns grows distant. The courthouse door closes. The harbour settles into slower sounds. Rope against mast, water against wood, a gull somewhere in the dark, in a small room, or a cabin, or a loft above a stable. Someone folds a garment for mourning. Someone checks the fire. Someone whispers a prayer for children, or for absent kin, or simply for one more day of strength. The air smells of ash and old wool and cooling earth. A pot has been emptied. Footsteps have quieted. The world has not become fair. It has only become still for a moment. You let that stillness widen. You imagine tired hands unclenching at last, if only in sleep. You imagine names spoken softly so they will not be lost. You imagine the long road of history stretching onward, not straight, not kind, yet marked by people who keep walking it with courage others rarely deserve from them. The fields rest in darkness. The streets empty. The river goes on moving under the night sky, steady and unreadable. And as the new republic settles into its uneasy dreams, you drift with the softer sounds of breathing, embers and distant water, knowing that even in uncertain freedom, people carried dignity carefully, like a small warm light cupped against the wind.